Hi, and welcome to my workshop. Tonight I'm going to show you a little N-scale service station that I built. I picked this thing up at a show, and it's going to go on our Model Railroad Club's N-scale portable layout. Now, if you haven't seen it before, it's something that our club's been building to take to shows so we can get attention to our table where we offer a scholarship. And it has some N-scale buildings on it, mostly from Mud Creek models, but it needs a gas station. So I picked up this City Classics, and this is what comes inside the kit. So the first thing I did was I removed all of the wall pieces off of the plastic sprues. These are kind of old castings, so they're pretty thick. I put them on my Ultimation sander to get rid of the nubs and also to make all of the edges square. And I made sure that all of my walls had square edges. It'll make it easier for putting it together. Then I went ahead and sprayed it with a white primer, and I went over that with a clear. That was going to be my base color. Then I sprayed the concrete pad a light gray and the back wall a dark gray. And I started taping the building to put the blue stripe across the bottom. I used Tamiya masking tape for right up against the edge, and then blue painter's tape to cover the rest of the building. The blue painter's tape left some residue when I pulled it off, though. So I airbrushed a blue, and that'll be the blue band that runs around the base of the building. Then when I peeled off all of the tape, it had come out pretty good. The Tamiya tape works really well. It allows you to push it down into the little crevices, so I didn't have any leaking. Now, one thing about the N-scale decals, they're really small. I had to get out some of my graphic arts magnifiers just to read them. Now, since this building was going to be portable, I cut out a plastic base that it would be set on. I spray painted the roof with a texture paint. Then I went over it with the gray paint and went over the plastic base with black paint. I also painted my walls with a clear to go over the blue stripe. Then for my base, I went over the black paint with some AK asphalt just to give it a little texture. Now I started putting the walls together. I had some City Classics corner braces, and I was going to use those. I glued one in place, but before I glued the other wall to it, I put my silver paint on the door and the window. Then I glued my side wall to the front wall. And those corner braces really come in handy when you have small buildings like this. I put the other wall together and glued the back wall into place. Then I put a couple pieces of styrene inside the back wall to hold everything together. This was going to be moved around a lot. And then I just placed everything on the base that I had made to see how it all fit. Now it comes on the instructions with an interior and some signs, and I tried coloring some of them. I was thinking of using them, but I ended up not using much of them in the end. I went ahead and started gluing my acetate windows in place. I just placed it inside the building and then used a Tamiya thin glue to glue it in place. It just wicks underneath it and it holds it in. Now I had scanned the interior drawing that they had given us on the instructions, and then I placed it and used it to put another background in place for an interior, and I had also collected a bunch of signs that I was going to use, and I scaled those down and printed everything out. Now, N-scale signs, when you scale them down, they're so small they're really hard to read, but you can still get the impression of what they are. So I cut a bunch of those out and then just used canopy glue to glue them on the inside of the windows. The nice thing about canopy glue is it dries clear, so you can't really tell that they've been glued onto the windows. Then I attached the interior that I had printed out to a piece of cardboard, folded it, and glued it in place. And that way when you look through the window, you get the impression that there's an interior in there with stuff on the wall. Next thing I did was glued together the gas pumps. They came in 2 pieces, and after I glued them I sanded them and then went ahead and primed them, again using white. One set of the pumps was going to be white with the blue stripe, and the other pumps were going to be orange with the blue stripe, and the oil racks were also going to be orange, so I painted those. And then again I taped off above where the blue stripe was going to be, and in this case I just brush painted the blue on and then let that dry. And they had also included a soda machine and an ice machine, so I painted the soda machine red. I was disappointed there wasn't any Coca-Cola decal though. And this was the colors that everything was going to have once they were finished and put in place. Now I wanted something on the back wall of the shop as well, so you didn't just see a blank wall if you looked inside. So I found a couple pictures showing the inside of shops and just printed one of those out and glued it to the back wall. I had also glued a divider so that if you were looking in one of the set of side windows, you weren't seeing out the transoms over the doors into the restrooms. Now it was time to start applying the decals. And the first ones that I put on were for the ladies in the men's room. And I thought, well, those went on pretty easily, because N-scale decals are really tiny. Well, then I started having to do the pumps and the ice machine, and I realized how difficult small decals really were, especially getting the gauges and stuff onto the pumps. But I managed to get it done, especially using some microsol and microset. And that was especially needed for putting those bands around the top of the building. Those things made me nervous because it was going to be hard to keep them straight. And they were in 3 pieces. You had to have the ends line up going around the corners. But I managed to get them on, and microsol helped everything snuggle down into the crevices. Then I put a gloss clear over all of the pumps and everything else I had put decals on. I used a scalpel to cut out the Gulf sign because I had to cut right around the very edge of the sign. The decal film went beyond where it was going to go, so I had to have a perfect cut all the way around. But that went pretty well. Now it was time to put together the islands and the lights. The post that came with the kit was too thin, so I used some 1/16 inch styrene. And I drilled holes in the island and the lights to put the styrene in. Remember, this thing was going to be handled a lot. And then once I glued them in place, I used some plastic putty to fill the top of the light hole. Once this was sanded and painted, you wouldn't be able to see it. Now I glued the Gulf sign onto the base, and I used a couple of blocks to hold it in place while the glue was drying. Then I put masking around the windows, and I was going to spray the building with a gloss clear to cover the decals. Now for the hose for the pumps, it was a piece of wire, and I measured it so that I could use a drill and drill into the pump, and that way I could stick the hose in the one end where it was going into the handle and the other end where it goes into the pump. And then I super glued all those pieces of wire in place onto the pumps. Now I had a 3D printing of some junk from Mud Creek Models, and I was going to stick it inside the building. So I went ahead and painted it, and then I went over it with a dark wash just so the colors weren't quite as bright. Then I went ahead and glued that into the floor inside the shop, and then I glued the roof in place. Then I started gluing the islands and the lights on, and I drilled holes in the base where they would go so they'd be good and secure. Then I used some super glue and goo and glued the sign in place. I also put in the vending machine, and then I just used super glue to glue the pumps and the oil rack in place on the islands. Now I did a little bit of weathering of tire marks going inside the garage. Those would be toned down a little bit when I did the final weathering. Now, to make some signs that would show the pump prices, I found a couple old Gulf signs online and brought those together and printed them out. And then once I saw them scaled down, I picked which I liked best, which meant you could actually read them. And I cut those out. And this was how my N-scale service station turned out. It's definitely not a Craftsman kit, and the technology is a little old. I think this kit was from the 90s. And I'm not going to say it was fun to put together, but I'm happy with how it came out. And it'll look great on our club's N-scale layout. And I hope you might have picked up a tip or found something interesting. And as always, I want to thank you for watching.